I heard this when I was growing up. Many people thought that marriage was for people that couldn't take the rigors of the celibate life, right? They couldn't take all of the discipline. And so, therefore, the vocation of celibacy was for the stronger spiritual people, and marriage is for the weaker spiritual people, right? Well, here's the thing. Celibacy is exceptional because marriage remains the normal calling in this life. And in a sense, it's better because heavenly marriage is better than an earthly marriage. Celibates skip earthly marriage to foreshadow and show us what heavenly marriage will be like. So, objectively, in that sense, you could say that it is superior. But in the subjective sense, the better vocation is the one that God's calling you to. And in fact, many priests have said marriage is more difficult than celibate life because, you have to really give yourself to another person intimately every single day, 24/7. And then when you have children, you give yourself to them and sacrifice for them in a direct way, whereas the priest still gets time to himself, or the nun still gets time to themselves at the end of the day, away from other people in their own room. Whereas if you're married, you always are around your family, and you always have to give of yourself to your family. So the calling of the married person in many cases is more difficult than the priesthood. So the only way that it's exceptional or better is because it just foreshadows the heavenly reality, not just the earthly reality. And so if you look at quote 11, the superiority of continence to marriage never means, in the authentic tradition of the church, a disparagement of marriage or belittling of its essential value. It does not even imply sliding, even merely implicitly, toward a Manichaean understanding of the body and of sex. In the words of Christ, we do not find any basis whatsoever for the disparagement of marriage. So both vocations are equally beautiful, and it's whatever one you're called specifically to by God. Okay, marriage and celibacy complement each other. They do not contradict. Thank you. And marriage reveals the spousal character of the celibate vocation, just as the celibate vocation reveals the sacramentality of marriage. So both reveal each other beautifully, mirror each other beautifully. Now, the question that comes up a lot, why can't women be priests? And so here's why. There's an ontological problem with a woman standing in the person of Christ because he was a man. Gender and matter. Again, priests are in persona Christi Capitis. They're in the person of Christ the head. Christ was incarnate as a man in the flesh. The church is the bride. Christ is the bridegroom. And so, when the Christ instituted the priesthood, he chose only men to be his apostles, the first priests and bishop, even though he broke many other cultural norms at the time. So the church has always looked to that initiation of the sacrament of holy orders by Christ as an ontological necessity for a man to be a priest, because it's to have a woman be up on the altar in the form of Christ, and then the bride of the church would not be ontologically possible. Now, the other question that always arises is, what about married priests? Okay? Can we ever have married priests? Well, Catholic priests have been married in the past, but for the past 1,000 years in the Latin Rite of the Church, priests have been chosen from among celibate men, as I stated before. Now, this practice is part of church discipline and could possibly change, but it's unlikely because of everything we've been talking about, the beauty of celibacy and the sacrifice of it, and the witness of it to the heavenly reality. And so I know Pope Francis has commissioned a study of that, and they continue to look at it and see what the benefits or pros or cons are. But to lose, I've heard, again, many priests have told me that I've talked to, and I've asked them about what do you think? Should we have the married priesthood? And to a man, all of them have told me no. They think celibacy is necessary for the priesthood because that way priests can be fully dedicated to the church. I think of St. Paul in his letters. It's better for a man not to marry so that because if he's married, his attention is divided between the church and his wife. But if he's not married, then his attention can be fully dedicated to the church. Now, the joys of marriage are easier to see, but the crosses of marriage are often hidden. In the celibate vocation, the crosses are easy to see, but the joys are often hidden. You don't a lot of times realize it unless you actually talk to the priest about the joys of their vocation. And so we have to remember that true joy comes from doing one thing, and that is the will of God. That's where true joy comes from. So if we have, whatever your vocation is, if you have the will of God and you're following that and you're surrendering to it, then you're going to be truly joyful and happy. Now, Christ's words about celibacy show that this can also inspire a person to make a total gift of self for the kingdom. Thus, Christian celibacy is not a rejection of the deep meaning of sexuality, but a living out of it even fuller, more profound way. So, through celibacy, we redirect, as I've said before, the sexuality toward the glory of heaven. And if you look at quote 13, on the basis of the same disposition of the personal subject and on the basis of the same spousal meaning of being, as a body, male and female, there can be formed the love that commits man to marriage for the whole duration of his life, but there can also be formed the love that commits man for his whole life to continence for the kingdom of heaven. So either way, when we go with what God's will is, then he will give us the strength to dedicate our life to the vocation that he's calling us to and direct our hearts in that way. And so that's the beauty of both the celibate life, that vocation, as well as married life, and pointing to those realities.